Carrie, Ethel, members of the Kennedy family, to all of you who have supported this evening, especially our friend Norman Sue, and I'd like to especially thank Harvey Weinstein and all the people who made Bobby into a movie. In general, I do not believe former presidents should receive awards. For having had the job was quite enough honor for a lifetime. Besides, people have to say outlandish things about you. Carrie read that account of my protean trip to Africa. You can't believe everything you read, you know. But after you reach a certain age, you like to read that you don't need sleep. And I just did that poor journalist the way people used to do in law school, you know, where they'd turn the lights on in their room and go to sleep anyway. So they wanted everybody else to be miserable in class the next year, thinking they'd stayed up all night studying. But I'm honored to have this award for several reasons. First of all, in 1968, when Robert Kennedy ran for president, I was a senior at Georgetown. I worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for its chairman, J. William Fulbright. I shared his deep opposition to our policy in Vietnam. I lost 4 of my high school classmates there. And when Robert Kennedy announced for president, knowing he would be criticized, knowing the odds were long, knowing he would even put his own life in danger, I was elated. Elated because he had won my heart forever by his trip to South Africa to stand against apartheid, and by his trip to Appalachia to stand with the poor white people among whom I was born. In 1993, when I was president, I was honored to go to Arlington Cemetery at Ethel's request to observe the 25th anniversary of Robert Kennedy's death, and 5 years later to go to Joe's home in Massachusetts for the 30th anniversary. If you come to our home in Chappaqua, you will see 2 of the old American letters that Robert and Ethel Kennedy collected, involving George Clinton, longest-serving governor in American history, and Thomas Jefferson's vice president, who was for 21 years and 2 stints the governor of New York. They were given to me by Ethel Kennedy on the 25th anniversary of Senator Kennedy's death. The last day of his life was 2 days before I graduated from college. My entire senior class was somehow suspended from the normal joys of that day by knowing we had lost someone of surpassing importance. And I honor his memory as best I can by saying tonight he must be so proud of his wife and his children for how valiantly they have lived out his legacy. Carrie's book and the play, Speak Truth to Power, and the memory of Robert Kennedy's Ripple of Hope speech called to mind, it seems to me, 3 things that are surpassingly relevant at this moment. It is always important to speak truth to power anytime people have power, there is always a risk that it will be abused. The central defining genius of the American system was that our framers tried to set up a government that was able enough to bring power to bear on our most persistent problems and could change and grow over time, but always, always, always with protections against the abuse of power. And whenever anyone for any reason, under any circumstances, claims that they should be able to exercise power without any accountability to anybody else, we should question that, because the framers of the country knew what they were doing. The second thing that this whole evening is about is embodied in the ripple of hope. And that is, it is not enough to be against bad things, you must do something good. And you do not have to be rich or powerful or in power to do something good. One of the most hopeful developments in the world since the end of the Cold War has been the veritable explosions across the earth of non-governmental groups. Citizens trying to do public good as private people. After I sit down, you will learn about many of them tonight. When I became president, there were none of these non-governmental organizations in Russia. Today, there are 63,000. Indeed, President Putin's so worried about them, he's trying to rein them in. And I wish he wouldn't do that, but it is, compared to having none, a high-class problem. When I became president, there were none of these groups in China. Today, there are 250,000 registered with the government, and all my friends there believe there are at least 500,000 more. There must be 1 million non-governmental organizations in India alone, and they are sweeping across Africa, sweeping across Southeast Asia, sweeping across Latin America. And they're being funded increasingly not just by the very, very wealthy, but also by all the rest of concerned humanity through the internet, through things like the Dutch postal code lottery, where instead of giving one person $1 gazillion like American lotteries, everybody that lives in a given area code wins. They only draw out the area code once a month. And 100% of the profits, the most innovative charity in the world, 100% of the profits go to combat global poverty and other global problems. So every Dutch citizen knows every time they buy a lottery ticket, the most they can win is a vacation, but they might change the world. It is an astonishing thing. And so I say to all of you that if you ask me, what have I learned in my long life? I was born at the end of World War II in a state with an income barely half the national average. I was the first person in my family to go to college. When I was a child in my little town in Arkansas, the great middle class based on meritocracy and equal opportunity had not yet been established. So the person supplying your food and the person that was filling your tank with gas might have an IQ as high as the doctor at the local hospital. Most of the rest of the world still has that circumstance. Intelligence, ability, and dreams are evenly distributed all across the planet. But opportunity, investment, and systems that establish the necessary connection between what you do and the results you get are not. So it is important for all of us to stand in all those breaches. The final thing that we learn from the life and example of Robert Kennedy is embodied in what he said after Martin Luther King was killed, and embodied in his brother's magnificent speech at his funeral. Somehow they learned to live, the Kennedys, with indescribable loss, without bitterness or the desire for vengeance. They learned to live as Mandela lived. They learned to live in hope instead of fear, in love instead of hatred. And so the final point I want to make is that is a choice. I never will forget the heartbreaking conversation I had with Yasser Arafat, begging him not to start the Second Intifada, telling him it would only help the reaction and break the peace process. When Ariel Sharon went on the Temple Mount for the first time, any Israeli had done it in 33 years, I said, do not do this, do not do this. He said, I have to do it. We are being shamed. I said, no, you're not. You have to give somebody permission to humiliate you. I said, he's coming up here for domestic political purposes. It doesn't have anything to do with you. What would you do, he said. What would you do in the face of our shame? I said, I would find the most beautiful Palestinian girl I could find. And when they come up there with 100 soldiers, I would walk alone holding this child's hand, and I would give him a bouquet of flowers from her and have her welcome him and offer to tour the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and tell him when it's yours he could come back every day. And he said, and I remember it was as if we were on two different planets. And I knew that I had not lived the life he had had. I knew that I had not seen the Palestinians humiliated not just by the occupation, but really by all the other Arabs who let them suffer in those camps for decades when the price of oil was enormous and they could have bailed them out and changed their circumstances, that it was far more complicated than that. I knew he could never understand really the suffering of the Israelis and what they had been through and the historical experience that brought them to that point. But I knew this, he did have a choice, and he was even older than me. And he made the wrong choice. I said, you know, don't you understand you give up your freedom? Mandela became a free man while still in prison because he made a decision. He made a decision not to let his heart turn to stone. So as we enjoy and honor the real heroes of the night, the people who will be introduced to you when I sit down, let us remember those three things. Power is good, but it must be accountable and limited. Power is not confined to governments. The non-governmental movement gives us all far greater power to do good than any group of private citizens have ever had. And just as Robert Kennedy said so many years ago, if you have the power to do something, you have the responsibility to do it. So we all have to do our part because we can. We can in a way we never could before. And finally, in a world torn by religious, cultural, political, racial hatreds and divisions, every time we deny our common humanity and assert that our differences are more important, it is a choice. It is paralysis in prison to live in a shame-based world. It is liberty to seek your own new beginnings every day. The sequencers of the human genome discovered that we were 99.9% the same, all of us, every living, breathing human being, which means all of us commit a sin of hubris every day because all of us spend more than 90% of our time thinking about that 1/10 of 1% of our lives that is different. And yet without each other, we'd be nothing. Whoever in this room is the most handsome or beautiful, with the strongest body and the biggest bank account and the biggest brain, if you were alone on this earth, it wouldn't amount to a hill of beans. There would be no one to know, no one to appreciate, no one to care. So let us remember as we try to free others from their shame, it requires all of us to spend just a little more time on the 99.9% of us that we share with every living soul. Thank you, and God bless you.